I present to you God's last plague and Passover, inspired by the book of Exodus.
Last plague and Passover. In our last story, we learned about the plagues God sent on Egypt. Pharaoh was warring against God. His heart became hard, and he refused to let Israel go. Pharaoh saw himself as God's equal and would not budge in letting his slaves be free. In this story, we will learn how God does not relent trying to deliver his people. God would send more plagues, climaxing at one final act of judgment, the Passover, as inspired by the book of Exodus. Pharaoh's heart of stone turned to steel. He sat upon his throne bitterly, cursing God. His servants begged him to let the Israelites go. Pharaoh considered it, but the wrestlings of his mind and soul were too cluttered. He refused again and again. His pride never waned. God sent a swarm of locusts to cover the face of the land. The east wind blew, and like storm clouds, the locusts overshadowed the land. Every fruit tree, plant, and crop of the land was consumed. Pharaoh begged God to stop, and he did, but he would not let the people go. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Stretch out your hand towards heaven, and darkness will shroud the land." And so Moses stretched his hands towards heaven, and darkness seeped into the great city of Egypt for 3 days. Everything was pitch black, and the Egyptians could not see one another. The darkness of the land mirrored Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh again brought Moses to his throne, desiring to play God once again. "Go with your people," Pharaoh said. "Only let your livestock stay here, for ours have been killed by the plague." Moses answered, "Our livestock come with us. Every animal we own to the last hoof will depart from here." But the Lord's act had hardened Pharaoh's heart. He was bitter and spiteful. "Get away from me," he yelled. Pharaoh now rose from his throne and pointed towards Moses. His face fumed with rage, and his voice trembled. His composure broke. "If I see your face again, you shall die," he exclaimed. "As you wish," Moses said. "I will not see your face again." And then Moses departed. Soon after, God came to Moses and said, "There is one more plague I will bring upon Pharaoh and all of Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go. Go before the people, and ask that every man and woman gather silver and gold from their neighbor." And God gave every person favor from the Egyptians. For Moses was greatly feared and respected among the people. Moses went back before the people of Israel and spoke for God, saying, "At midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land shall die. From the house of Pharaoh to every animal, the firstborn shall fall at my hand." Moses spoke with the intensity and gentleness of God, just as he encountered on Mount Sinai. "There shall be an outcry throughout the land, such as there never has been, nor ever will be again," he said. For it was believed back then that Egypt had their gods, and the Israelites had one God. They did not believe there was a real separation of power between the two. Yet the Lord, in one final sweep of his mighty hand, would show the world that there was only one true God. The warning reached Pharaoh's ear, yet he did not flinch. His heart was like steel, yet even steel can be melted like wax. The Lord ordered his people to mark that month as the beginning of the year. On the 10th day at twilight, They took a small, spotless lamb for each household to eat. If the lamb was too large for the household, they would share the rest with their neighbors. In their homes they would eat with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. The next morning they were commanded to burn whatever was left. They would continue this tradition as a memorial, for God was going to deliver his people that night. This was called the Lord's Passover. The Lord ordered them to take the blood from the lamb and spread it on the doorposts of their homes. Then God said, "I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike all the firstborn. I will execute my righteous judgments, for I am the Lord. This blood on the doorpost will be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall or destroy you." For God would use the blood of the Lamb as a symbol of favor, protection, and deliverance. A symbolic story that would echo into eternity. So Moses called the elders of Israel, and all of them made sure the people spread blood on their doorposts. They hid in their homes and worshipped God. Midnight came. Silence filled the streets, and all the lights had dimmed. Egyptians slept soundly in their homes, while the Israelites remained awake, waiting for what would happen next. God descended on the land. Silently he wandered through the cities, passing by every home. The only sound that could be heard were the exhaling breaths of every firstborn. They breathed their last as God passed through. Life exited each and every home that was not protected by the blood of the Lamb. God, the defender of Israel, had passed over. Every firstborn that was not protected by the blood was destroyed. Over 80 years before this night, the streets of Egypt were filled with the screams of Hebrews. They cried as their firstborn sons were taken and thrown into the Nile River. Babies squalled as they were held by their feet and thrown to the crocodiles. God had heard their cries and lamented. Now, as dawn broke after the Lord had passed over Egypt, the city erupted with the screams of Egyptians. The hardened heart of Pharaoh shattered under the hammer of God, and the Israelites were released from their captivity after 430 years. The Israelites were given silver and gold as plunder from the Egyptians, and they fled the land with their children and livestock. This day would be celebrated for centuries afterwards as the Passover feast, remembering God's faithfulness to his people and his relentless pursuit of his children.